feller told me one time they got a weed down here and they call it a loco weed. When the horses and cows eat it, they...
Dan Blockers was his father passed away unexpectedly in 1972 when he was just 14 years old, and he retained his feelings for 53 years. Dan Blockers' son, now 67, is imprisoned away, is speaking, and fans find what they're hearing unbelievable. The Brooklyn 999 actor shows how the horde of fans impacted Bonanza's family life, the truth about his own acting career, the missing kid moments everywhere they moved, and his words depicted Dan Blocker, Hose Cartwright's modest kid, was born on December 10, 1928, in a picture that no one anticipated. Dallas, Texas, and he didn't come in peace. He was so large at birth, weighing 14 pounds, that he broke a record in Bowie County. His birth certificate even had his name incorrectly listed months later. Bobby Dawn was written by Bobby Dan Davis. Blocker's physician, Mary, his mother, had one of the town's most agonizing deliveries, and his father Shaw had no notion that this enormous infant would grow up to be a behemoth on American television. Residents commented about how no one else had the birth for years, surpassed the 14-pound mark until recently. When Dan was 6 years old, the family relocated to O'Donnell, a tiny farming community in West Texas, where they were experiencing just as Dan was 11 years old when his older sister Virginia passed away from illness. When it happened, the family was devastated, but life had to go on. Dan played in the rear of the grocery store Shack opened, where they also lived. By the 5th grade, he was packing groceries and transporting 40 lb cow feed sacks for clients. At the time, the town had roughly 3,000 residents, 2 drugstores, 2 lumber yards, and 2 doctors. Dan wasn't a part of that world. Despite being the shopkeeper's child, he was well known for his stature. Enduring, but his diligence earned him respect, and Dan didn't only develop, he developed quickly, reaching a height of 5 feet and a weight of 105 pounds by the time he was 10 years old. He wasn't only larger than the other kids. By the time he was 12, he was 6 feet and 200 pounds. He actually worked with the grown guys on grain, but he was larger than many of them. Whenever heavy lifting was required, vehicles on elevators, and people in the town, even Main Street, was roped off on Saturday evenings so that Dan could box with larger guys by the age of 13. He never lost when he was competing against men in their 20s. In fact, there is a report that whether it's true or not, no one questioned his ability to lift a car off a guy when it dropped off a jack. He weighed 275 pounds, stood 6 feet 4 inches, and wearing shoes that were a size 14.5. His father used to make fun of Dan for being too large to ride and not useful, as all because he is too small to pull a cart. But his size would soon make him. Dan's parents enrolled him in the Texas military when he was 12 years old. They likely anticipated that the discipline at the San Antonio Institute would help him develop into more than just a large body. Dan had previously studied structure at the same institution that taught General Douglas MacArthur. He would benefit greatly from his toughness and determination after the TMI in 1946. He played football at Hardin-Simmons University, and because of his size, he was a natural. He was 18 years old, strong, quick, and admired by teammates, but his journey would not end with football. He transferred to Sul Ross State in 1947 and enrolled there to assist backstage at a school play. The performance featured Old Lace and arsenic, and they Dan agreed that they needed someone who was strong enough to carry fictitious dead bodies. Something moved those things around the actors who were viewing everything, came together, it ignited something within of him, and he saw a new route. He abruptly changed his major from physical education to acting. At Sul Ross Dan, a football player turned actor, continued to play football, but his world was theater. He bounced, worked odd jobs, and participated in rodeos. He found purpose on stage, working at bars to pay for school, and he was the right size for physical roles, but his gentleness and expressiveness shocked people. Teachers saw that his classmates supported him, and he graduated in 1950 with a degree in drama and speech. Everyone expected him to pursue a career in sports, but instead, he selected a more difficult option with no assurances. Offers came in from boxing promoters, and professional football teams also called, but Dan declined. Desired more than to rely on his size or his fists to earn a life. Desiring art, he relocated to Boston for the Summer Stock Theater in 1950. Was 2,000 meters away from Texas, and had no acquaintances, yet he decided to take the chance. Performed in shows every week, worked for minimal pay, picked up lines quickly, and played a variety of parts. It was demanding, but it was all he desired. Dan Blocker believed he was headed to Boston to pursue a career as an actor, but life had other ideas. In November 1950, the United States Army summoned him up. The Korean War was heating up, and Blocker, who measured 6 feet 4 inches in tall and weighed over 250 pounds, was drafted. It wasn't easy outfitting a man that size. It took the Army a full month to locate boots big enough for his size, 14.5 feet. After basic training in Louisiana, Blocker was deployed to Japan, then straight to the front lines of Korea. In December 1951, he joined F Company 2nd, the 45th Division's Battalion 179th Infantry Regiment. The soldiers there provided, he was given a moniker immediately, and the big gun battle arrived quickly. His unit was dropped. The days Blocker arrived were filled with snow, muck, and gunfire in the icy trenches along the Jamestown line. As a private, but he left quickly. His leadership was notable, and he was promoted to corporal, then sergeant, and finally master sergeant. Blocker spent 209 days in all, not only following commands, but also taking the initiative. One of his worst memories of active battle occurred on Christmas Eve 1951, when Blocker, and for 10 hours, his group was locked down atop Hill 255 in the dark, frigid weather. When defending Hill 206 on May 25, 1952, the situation became much more brutal. Although 21 Americans were injured and 1 American died, the unit also managed to remove 132. Blocker fought through mortar explosions and ambushes with enemy fighters. During one grueling, he was shot during the struggle while attempting to help his injured companions. Won him a Purple Heart, but it also altered him because he had witnessed too much. After returning home, he made it obvious that he opposed war, particularly the Vietnam War. Considering what he had experienced, he didn't want American bombs launched on defenseless people. The battle was still ongoing. Demonstrated another aspect of Blocker. He was able to lead under duress and assist with planning, and lead risky patrols in areas such as Old Baldy 1 and Pork Chop Hill. His unit was outnumbered and deep in an ambush when they marched straight into it. Hostile territory, but Blocker maintained composure and commanded the battle instead of fleeing. Back he carried the injured to safety because to his massive bulk, but it also made him his unit was rotated out throughout a large area, but he never gave up. He had received a significant list of awards by July 1952, including the Korean Service Combat Infantryman Badge, the Korean Presidential Unit Citation, a medal featuring 2 campaign stars, and more. His Army service ended 2 days later on September 24, 1952. He eventually wed Dolia Lee Parker, whom he had cherished during the conflict, wrote her letters from Korea, and they were now at last a permanent couple. Hosted a little ceremony in Carlsbad, New Mexico, the week before Blocker returned. He picked up exactly where he left off at Saul Ross State Teachers College. Off had obtained a master's degree in drama, yet acting remained his goal. He began teaching high school English and drama in Sonora, Texas, because he had debts to pay. His students recalled after a year, his booming voice reverberated around the hallways, particularly when he read Shakespeare. Dan Blocker, a teacher in Sonora, relocated to Carlsbad, New Mexico, where he worked at Eddy Elementary School as a 6th grade teacher and coach, even as he continued to teach while maintaining his love of acting and drama, using his classroom as a stage. Alive. Then an unforeseen circumstance occurred while Blocker and the family's travel from Sonora to Hollywood was intended to be a vacation rather than a job search. But fate had other intentions when Blocker was using a phone booth to make a call while decked up in full cowboy attire, including a gaudy blouse and high boots. Blocker was 6 feet 4 inches tall, and a talent agent saw him wearing a large straw hat, and appeared as though he had walked out of a Western. The agent didn't require he knew Blocker was destined for television after only one glance at the script or audition. Blocker's wife and children, meanwhile, sat in their station wagon, utterly oblivious to the fact that their lives were about to alter forever. It was the ideal arrangement Hollywood had in the late 1950s. Blocker appeared authentic at cowboy shows, showcasing his Texas heritage, size, and that rough appeal was precisely what the producers were searching for. A brief encounter on the sidewalk became the start of something enormous. But Blocker didn't relocate to California to pursue fame. Instead, he relocated to Los Angeles in 1956 to obtain a Ph.D. in education from UCLA. He took his studies seriously. He supported his family by working as a substitute teacher in Glendale schools when he was a student. He had 4 children, including twins, Deborah Lee and Dana Lynn, girls born in 1953, David in 1955, and Dirk. His life was hectic in 1957 as he balanced employment, school, and parenting, yet he was able to maintain equilibrium. Dan Blocker wasn't a star at first. He portrayed the Goon, a creature, in a 1957 Three Stooges short film. Outer Space Jitters was a silly science fiction comedy in which he was 6 feet 4 inches and weighed more than 300 pounds, and he was credited as Don Blocker without even using his true name, and donned an entire extraterrestrial outfit. The film, which lasted about 17 minutes, was filmed in just 2 days, but it demonstrated how early Blocker was at attracting attention with his size. Even in something as ridiculous as a Stooges sketch, he appeared in the Sheriff's Coochies. Made his television debut as a bartender. Although he didn't adhere to one part for a long time, he played a cavalry lieutenant too in Gunsmoke in 1956. Years later, he returned to the same show in a different capacity. By that time, he had already featured in Colt 45 and Have Gun Will Travel, and he was very popular in 1957 alone. He grew up in several westerns, including The Rifleman Cheyenne and others, portraying strong guys, enforcers, or outlaws. These roles weren't glamorous, but they brought him attention. People recalled the large man with a powerful voice, and then Maverick. The show transformed his life. He portrayed a guy called, according to HollyLegacy, Blocker. It was the most significant part of his early career. Although it was a Western, Maverick's humor set it apart from the rest. Was witty, and Blocker was a perfect fit. He wasn't simply large. He was also humorous. At that point, producers and casting directors realized he could combine strength and charm. Striking a balance between humor and in drama would eventually come to characterize Hose Cartwright's personality. But that revelation started with HollyLegacy, and he played Small Carl in a recurrent part in Another Samarin City in the West in 1958. Buttinger. The show only ran for one season, but it helped people connect. That would alter his life. David Dorr, he was Samarin City's producer, recalled Blocker from previous roles, such as his role as a blacksmith in The Restless Gun. And a cattleman named Dorr liked what he saw in another episode. So when he began, he knew who he wanted. When the show's writers were working on a new series about a family of ranchers in the American West. In 1959, Bonanza began working on the show, but they weren't sure who would do the majority of the parts. But it was evident that Hose Cartwright was written for Dan Blocker. No one else was even given an audition by the producers. Understood what they had, and they were correct. The show began slowly while they sat at the number. Although the ratings were 45, Blocker's performance helped improve the situation. The show gradually rose in the charts, and a few years later it was the most watched program. Hose wasn't initially intended to be a serious figure on American television. He was supposed to be a huge, plotting person who could really punch hard, but remained silent. He was described as weak-witted and unsophisticated, but Dan Blocker wasn't like. Even though he was 6 feet 4 inches and weighed more than 300 pounds by the later seasons, a man with a master's degree who had taught English was behind that size. Had intended to pursue a doctorate, and he brought all of that to the position. Rather than he portrayed Hose as intelligent, compassionate, and heartwarming, and the authors observed that they began altering Hose to resemble Blocker. He stopped being humorous. By the third season, when Bonanza reached number 2, the show's soul was relieved. People were enamored with Hose in the ratings. He was more than just muscle. The one who reminded spectators of the true cause of the Cartwrights and had a moral compass. But behind the in contrast to contemporary TV series that produced 10 or 12 episodes, the show featured horrific situations. Over 30 episodes were produced annually by Bonanza, which equated to 5 days a year. Working nearly 14 hours a day, Dan Blocker had to arrive at 7 o'clock. Wouldn't depart until 9 o'clock at night due to the heat, the outfits. It was quite a bit, especially for a man of his size, to ride the tricks. He would faint from the heat, but he persisted. He once claimed to have seen his television family more than his actual spouse and 4 children, and by 1972 he had filmed 415 episodes. Most performers today would be exhausted by such a workload. Additionally, Blocker's narrative is made much more poignant by the sacrifice he made. Prior to Bonanza, he had ambitious intentions for a career in education rather than stardom. He taught English while obtaining his master's degree in Texas. Controversy, even among 6 students, and his departure to California wasn't for he hoped to get a job in Hollywood for UCLA. Acting came to him by chance when someone saw him wearing a PhD, which was his true dream. Drew him into the business wearing a cowboy costume, and even after being cast in early interviews, Bonanza discussed how he didn't immediately give up on his studies, about balancing classes and filming, but ultimately it was not feasible. Memorizing scripts and spending the entire day filming interviews took up all of my time. He placed his studies on hold by 1961 and never had the opportunity to return. Subsequently stated that his greatest regret was not completing his PhD, yet he still gave to It's impossible to ignore television. Hose wasn't just a kind-hearted cowboy. He was a figure who gave viewers a sense of realism. By the middle of the 1960s, research revealed Bonanza Blocker once claimed to have played Hose, the emotional center of the show. Keeping one quotation in mind, "Let's act kindly now if we can," because he meant it when he said, "We will never pass this way again." Off-screen, one program dominated American television throughout the 1960s. Bonanza was not only well-liked, but also a national custom from 1964 to in 1967. It was the nation's top show every Sunday at 9 p.m. Almost 19 million homes watched, which translates to a 36.3 rating share in a short period of time. It had risen from 45th to 2nd and finally to the top for 9 seasons. Bonanza remained in the top 5 for years in a row. No other show had done it, and if the Cartwright family's reach extended beyond America, as they were viewed in almost 50 nations. Not until 1967 did CBS begin to broadcast in Canada, Brazil, France, Thailand, and even Saudi Arabia. Discovered something that was ultimately competitive with the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, even before Judy Garland's presentation incapable of causing any damage. But Blocker wasn't merely portraying a rancher. He became one, and when Bonanza was booming in 1963, he opened a real restaurant. The original one, known as the Bonanza Sirloin Pit, was located inside Westport, Connecticut. A 1925 Greyhound bus station. The concept was successful. People were aware of by 1966, 2 brothers, Sam and Charles Way, had come to believe it, purchased the brand, and quickly grew it. 3 other men then launched a comparable. Ponderosa Steakhouse, a chain in Indiana, retained both brands, expanding until 1989, when they were acquired by Metro Media. At that time, Bonanza had 600 eateries. The 2 chains combined in 1997, but continued to operate under different identities, with only roughly 75 sites left in 2019. Blocker had transformed his TV celebrity into something genuine, into a company where customers could enter, take a seat, and his film career continued to progress. And in 1963, he starred in Come Blow Your Horn. It was a Neil Simon comedy with Frank Sinatra, and it was successful, earning $12.7 million, and was among the most popular films of that year. In 1968, Blocker and Lady in Cement, Sinatra's next collaboration, was a criminal thriller. Rudy Koerman, a menacing businessman, was portrayed by Blocker. The film had that nasty, there was something more that folks didn't see off-screen, a jazzy 1960s Miami mood. All 4 of Dan Blocker's children studied karate during Bonanza's heyday. They received training from Chuck Norris before he became to fame. Blocker had married Michael Landon, and the cast had grown to be like family. Dolia Parker. In 1952, they stayed together after meeting in college. Together till his passing in 1972, their son David went on to become a producer and received, and Dirk became an actor and won an Emmy in 1998. Remained near his family and refused to allow his popularity to alter the fact that Mitch Vogel, who played later Jamie on Bonanza, stated that Dan was the type of person you could go hang out with and enjoy a beer with. On television, Dan Blocker was always portrayed as the amiable giant. He portrayed whose millions of viewers adored Cartwright's performance on Bonanza, but what they failed to notice was how he was silently struggling a lot. He was 6 feet 4 inches and weighed about 300 pounds. Offered him a strong on-screen presence, but there were health dangers involved as well. Before he passed away in May 1972, Dan had already started to exhibit major health concerns. Those close to him were unaware of the severity of his gallbladder issues. Despite the fact that gallbladder procedures are now speedy and low risk, especially for larger individuals, medical experts argue back then, in 1972, things were drastically different. The instruments and methods simply weren't as sophisticated. Some think that if he had undergone the same procedure 10 years ago, he might have lived later. But at the time, his enormity made everything more. On TV, he grinned, but off-screen, he was scary and kept everything to himself. 2 months prior to his passing, Dan had secured a quiet losing struggle. Director Robert Altman, who had previously collaborated with him, had chosen a new position that had the potential to transform his entire career. It was difficult for Dan to play the lead in The Long Goodbye. Depressed alcoholic author, nothing like the generous host, Dan had the opportunity.